everyone, and welcome back to the Over Manga Cast. My name is Sam, and this week, well, we're short a Matt and a Jay because of reasons. And so Jacob and I have decided to just do the usual Over Echo Chamber thing of being degenerates, right, Jake?
Oh, I am so sorry yet again. We're subjecting you to this, but you did click onto this, so no pity for self-inflicted wounds.
Yes, we're here to have a very scholarly and in-depth discussion about important matters in the space, such as, in this case, fan service.
Degeneracy, I hate it at all times categorically.
All right, and thank you everyone once again for tuning into the Over Manga Cast. As always, you can find us on all your social medias.
Okay, fine. Perhaps I have a slightly more subtle view on the subject than that. Slightly.
Slightly. Okay, so we are going to be talking about fan service, but I think it's important that we start off by defining our topic here. So, what is fan service? Now, for you, dear listener, you're probably immediately thinking of
That kind.
yes, the thing where you lock your door before you turn on a certain episode of your favorite anime. The thing with the bouncing boobs and the shaking butts and all that.
But fan service has a lot of different kinds. There's also a particular kind of fan service that is a more literal use of the word, where it's a reference of something that the fans are presumed to care about. Basically, a wink at the audience, a "isn't this a thing you like" kind of moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so for our purposes here, we're kind of dividing it into two subcategories. We've got sexy fan service of, attractive bodies in tight clothing, most often of the female persuasion, but it's not unknown to have fan service steered towards straight women and gay bisexual men.
Sort of thing's been getting better recently. Thank you, things like Eden Zero, for example.
Yes. The beefcake and the other cake on display in that manga is great. But when we're talking about fan service, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, abs and boobs and butts. When we're talking about fan service, for the fans, we're talking about things like, this is a bad example, but just off the top of my head, I'm thinking about like DMC Devil May Cry when El Dante gets the mop that falls on the top of his head and looks like OG Dante's hair.
Well, yeah, actually, I think that's a pretty decent example, because the big thing for this kind of fan service is it's a moment in a story that really only has metacontextual value. It's literally directed at the audience. It's diegetic, but it's not for any of the characters. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, it might mean something to the characters, but it doesn't mean to the characters as much as it might to the audience. It's usually some kind of reference to some other piece of media or continuity that is presumed to be beloved by the fans.
And that's the sort of the gray area, because there are perfectly valid in-universe reasons to have both versions of fan service. Sexy fan service can make sense because, well, your characters are presumably warm-blooded humans. They might be asexual and not care about that sort of thing, and that can even lead into its own sort of character building moment of, they experience a very sexual situation and they don't care, or your character can be Z-sexual, I think it is. The opposite of ace.
Yeah.
I forget what the word is, but you know what I'm getting at.
I'm pretty sure it is Z-sexual.
But basically, your character encounters something that they're attracted to and they respond to it. That has a certain context to it, from like a Doyleist perspective, I think is the term for out of universe, where or I think that's Watsonian. I don't know. I'm mixing up my academic terms. But for better or for worse, sexy fan service in that regard has a sort of immersion breaking aspect to it, one way or another.
There is a value to sexy fan service. It makes the below parts get all tingly. It's there to sell. I mean, not for nothing. There is the simple fact that sort of thing does actually have its appeal. And quite frankly, it does in fact have its place. It can be inserted into places where it does not belong, and that can be problematic for a multitude of reasons. And also, if you infer a fan service scene, like in the context of a story, could be like accidentally dehumanizing to a particular character, usually a female
Mhm.
character.
Goblin Slayer.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, Goblin Slayer's a really good example of this because that scene's not supposed to be sexy. That scene's supposed to be horrifying. Why did you frame the character's body like that?
And framing is a very important part of this because it's like you can have intimate scenes that are sexually provocative, but are still in character. And, for better or for worse, in our Western American culture, sex is held to a certain pedestal, a certain standard that makes it.
Even simple nakedness is
Mhm.
falls under that category. It's worth noting, as a manga podcast, one big thing about manga and the reason why sexy fan service is so, in my opinion, wearily prevalent. I don't actually consider myself that much of a prude, but like the reason why it
Compared to
gets
me.
the reason why it can get tiresome for some people, myself included, is the cultural standard for both nakedness and sexuality is different in Japan than it is in the West. The East is just more comfortable with the human body and the mechanisms therein than the West is, generally speaking. So they're more inclined to make a joke like, "You mean some poor dragon?" That kind of joke is told to, middle schoolers and nobody bats an eye over there. Whereas here, that's something that like someone will give you a questioning look if that's a material aimed at high schoolers, which strictly speaking is what Dragon Ball is aimed at.
And these are the pitfalls kind of the sexy fan service. It can be immersion breaking for certain audiences. It can be derailing in certain ways because you can be having a perfectly serious. I hesitate to say serious because sex scenes can be very serious. And treated with an appropriate amount of gravitas. I like to think that I can write them like that.
There's a level of it's designed to appeal to the audience member specifically.
Mhm.
Very rarely is a sex scene written in a way that isn't overtly stimulating for the audience member. And not even just like a sex scene, because this is slightly getting out of the manga space, but this is actually a really good example of a case where fan service of the sexy variety is it has the potential to actually directly undercut what you're going for. And I'm gonna get into the case where sexy fan service can actually work really well, like because there's a couple of different cases of that. In Code Geass, the nightmares piloted by the Japanese faction use what in the fandom is referred to as a motorcycle seat or a bike seat.
You're all thinking of the shots of Colin right now.
Yes, exactly. The shots of Colin. And like when her boobs are literally dangling in your face and there's supposed to be a serious dramatic theme stating moment going on, it's a little bit hard to take the moment seriously. It cheapens the impact of anything said or done because here's this thing that's supposed to make the below bits tingly. Like that's not supposed to be there. That's getting in the way of what you're trying to do.
And again, that calls into question, that gray area of like, at what point is it immersion breaking? Because you don't just to hit the hammer on the head, the female body is sexualized more than the male body is. So it's like, at what point does just a female character existing in a certain position.
Constitute fan service at all.
But in the example that you're explicitly pointing out, it's like, well, she's horizontal in a way that sticks her ass and tits out.
Yeah, it's pretty overt to the point where I've actually watched a few scenes of Code Geass with people, who are seeing these scenes for the first time, and it's actively distracting, And I mean, like, I do think that it is kind of disappointing that there are cases where, because like sexy fan service can indeed be used, in a positive sense if and not even necessarily sex scenes in particular, but like just fan service in general, if you have characters be around each other naked and it's just a normal scene to them, that speaks to a level of intimacy that they have with each other.
Mhm.
The problem is it's almost never used that way. The eek slap is so common and it does nothing for anybody 99% of the time. Um, I mean, like it has a bad reputation for a reason. It's abused and it's almost always there for the audience to the detriment of the narrative. And I think
Mhm.
that's an important factor to focus on because when fan service fails, it fails because it reminds you you're watching a product that's being presented to you.
Yeah, and we've been talking a lot about the sexy fan service in this regard, but there's also the other aspect that we brought up, the fan kind of fan service, where it's it also fits into the gray area of like, are you just using Chekhov's gun? Are you just doing appropriate narrative building of calling back to things in order to close the loop?
Yeah, I think for something to be fan service, good or bad, I think there has to be a level of this didn't need to be done.
Mhm.
That
And when I think of that, I think of, like, I hate to say it, but, like, moments in mecha anime and, like, Gundam and, like, where it's just ogling the thing that looks like the thing.
Yeah, yeah, any long running series, especially a case where it's long enough to have like branching universes, you'll get
Mhm.
situations where different versions of the story will call back to other different versions. And sometimes that can be really cool. Sometimes it can facilitate a crowning moment of awesome, especially if it's unobtrusive.
But what if you just have a tingling in your middle back?
Oh, you just murdered me.
I'm sorry. But that is the question. It's like, at what point do you kind of dilute the original impact? And I think that's more a case of bad fan service. Like, that's that dilution effect. If you do pull off the Chekhov's gun closing the loop, the narrative satisfaction, then we don't call it fan service because that phrase has an inherently kind of negative connotation to it.
But even a good reference like the one that you mentioned, previously, like, it makes you smile, and, like, to some extent, it reminds you that you're playing a game, but it also doesn't take you out of the current experience. Like, that's sort
Mhm.
of the thing. Fan service by its nature, it's service for the fans. It, by its nature, has a meta-contextual component to it, where it's playing to the audience in the way that a Greek chorus would.
Yeah, like when Suletta fenced Kuel in the late stages of Witch from Mercury, that had perfectly valid in-universe reasons to happen, but also
It's a Gundam series.
the Gundam visit audience got to go, "Just like Amuro and Char!"
Or all the other 30 billion people who have fenced.
Exactly, exactly.
As a playing to a beloved trope is a kind of fan service. It's
Mhm.
it's the thing we're waiting to see.
Not to date the episode, but I just recently finished Baldur's Gate 3, and there is a moment in the epilogue where one of the companions is talking to you about how, oh yeah, this reunion party that we're having is really nice. We should do this more often. And one of the things is, man, coordinating a bunch of friends to have a regular meetup, that sounds impossible.
Thank you, online spaces, for
Making that simpler. But that
BU Roll 20 or Foundry or whatever exists in the future.
But that is also a form of fan service. That is, you know, winking and nodding at the Dungeons and Dragons community that flocked to Baldur's Gate 3 because it's a D&D game.
That's a nothing line that no one would bother reacting to in the story. None of the characters have any meaning or connection associated with that line of dialogue. But we know that's a reference to meeting up to play the tabletop game Dungeons and Dragons that Baldur's Gate is based off of. I think that's a pretty good example, where it's not intrusive, but it is service for the fans because it's like, we're there too. We have trouble getting people to meet in person too, et cetera, et cetera. There's a
Yeah, it's like famously for this entire podcast, we don't play TTRPGs for the entire fourth quarter of the year.
because life.
Ugh.
And I think that's a good place to start getting into like some specific examples of various ways that fan service can be implemented for good or for ill.
So we have talked a lot about like why you do fan service, what its benefits are, the drawbacks in some ways more than others. So, to talk about some specific examples, we're going to start with the sexy fan service because it's the thing that you think about the most. It's like, I watch it for the plot. I had a millennial moment of like agedness earlier today when we were recording, where I was like just flipping through some clips and I saw a streamer talking, explaining the I watch it for the plot to her viewers. It's like, you need to explain this to people?
There are people too young to understand that reference. No.
That's bad for multiple reasons, but getting back to what we're talking about here, as much as we have kind of exacerbated the negatives of sexy fan service, there are good reasons to use it for and let's highlight some specific examples here. Do you have any, Jake?
Actually, believe it or not, I do. Much as I normally loathe this trope, it's mostly because of its overuse, not because of its lack of utility.
I'm waiting for the Eden Zero reference.
Actually, that's gonna be my second one, believe it or not, because whilst I do think that it can be a negative in this series, there's actually a good example of this in Fire Force.
Actually, that is a very deep well to draw from.
Yeah, I believe it was actually from our first reading where Shinra, I almost lost his name because Shiki,
Look, they both got the
they're they're the same
muscly,
dude.
spiky hair silhouette going on.
They're the same dude. They really are. And I love them. But yeah, Shinra, there's a moment where he accidentally walks in on the sister bathing. And it's a fan service scene. It's showing a attractive female character in a state of undress. But whilst Shiki I mean, they both have a pretty immediate reaction to it. And one thing that it does for Shiki's character is there's a sort of archetypical shonen protagonist archetype. And Shiki's reaction to the scene is actually fairly mature. Like he turns away and he apologizes for it, and he doesn't really, freak out or overreact. There's no projectile nosebleed or anything like. Or actually, there might have been, but like it wasn't emphasized. Like he got
Mhm.
over it quickly, and
He wasn't
it's
Master Roshi about it.
yeah. He wasn't Master Roshi, he wasn't even cheeky about it. Like, it establishes that he's a habituated person who's been with people, like, he's not a hermit like someone like Son Goku who wouldn't understand why being naked is a problem? Like, there's a
Mhm.
level of because there's a trope about shonen protagonists not knowing social cues, he understands the social cues, but he reacts with a level of maturity. It also speaks to him being a little bit older than a lot of shonen protagonists, because even though a lot of anime characters look the same, look the same age, Jotaro, uh, he's like out of school. So he's a little
Mhm.
bit more put together than your average shonen protag who's a hormonal teenager. And then the sister also reacts in a very similar way, which speaks to, again, her maturity. And then they're able to just have a conversation whilst in this state without it being weird. And, eventually they remember the state that one of them is in and they part, and, the scene ends. But it speaks to the level of habituation that Shinra has to being a relatively normal member of society, which is an unusual trait. A lot of shonen protagonists have a tendency to be some flavor of hermit who doesn't understand, who either doesn't understand why the female form in a state of undress is an issue or overreacts to it.
Mhm.
Um, and it speaks to the intimacy of their relationship. Like, you know, I mean, there's the potential ship there, most certainly, but like, you know, immediately that they are at the very least closer than coworker friends. They've already made a connection because they're able to have at least a semi normal, because, you know, I mean, like anybody accidentally walking into the situation is it's gonna be super awkward, but it's also not like comedically over the top awkward, you know?
Mhm.
It speaks to the degree to which they have gelled as friends more than coworkers, as they otherwise would be. And a similar thing, relative to Eden Zero. One thing that's kind of interesting is that despite how duplicitous and douchey he is, you never really question that Whis is a member of the family. And one of the scenes that was my favorite from Eden Zero, and one of the scenes that made me fall in love with the series, was the scene where Rebecca had just gotten out of the grip of a tentacle monster,
Mhm.
and Whis had been mocking her and making jokes about it, but then he gets grabbed by the tentacle monster in turn, and Rebecca helps the tentacle monster undress him. And like, there's
And
no
that's
maliciousness in it. That's just a thing that they do because they're basically siblings at this point. You know, like
they're
not like,
squabbling siblings, yeah.
yeah, they have squabbling sibling energy, but they're also not actually siblings just because of how comfortable they are with the untoward nature of the situation they're in. You know, like
Mhm.
it's that sort of unique relationship of you know, that level of found family where, you know, relationships are fraught, intimate, and intermixed. And you know, her, like, not even for her own sake, but just to tease Weiss, starts lifting his shirt while he's being grabbed by the robot tentacles. Like, there's just something so charming about the degree to what, like, because like Rebecca would not do that to an enemy. She wouldn't do it to a stranger ever. Wouldn't even think about it. You know,
Mhm.
like, if that was, Lobelia in that situation, Rebecca would not have done that, even though humiliating that big is something that not only would she want to see happen, but Lobelia deserves. But she wouldn't
Yeah,
do that because that's not the kind of person she is, and that's not the kind
that
of relationship they have.
it has a level of being informed by the character relationship that helps ground this inherently sexual moment still in the universe, and helps alleviate that thing that we were talking about, where it's like, in, you know, a more prudish Western sense, thinking that storytelling and sexuality need to be entirely divorced.
That sort of thing is part of the human condition. Not for nothing, you know, this is supposed to be examples of cases where it's done well, but like, oh, actually, holy crap, we haven't done this on the podcast, but there
Mhm.
is a manga that actually does this whole thing super freaking well. And it just occurred to me, we're going to have to do this someday.
Okay, hit me up.
There's a series called Tsubasa Those with Wings.
You've talked about this before.
One
To
of
to me individually,
right.
not on the podcast.
One of the really important aspects of the main character's journey is her coming to terms with her own sexuality. She is she's in a bit of a state of arrested development, but definitively out of, you know, childhood. She's not a teenager anymore. She's like, you know, 20-ish. And she has a very serious, very intimate, very romantic relationship with the deuteragonist of the series. And one of the crowning moments of awesome in the series is it's just one panel, but there's a sex scene between them, and it's near the end of the series. It's a very character affirming moment for her because there have been a lot of cases where you know, identity is a important aspect in that series. You know, orphans don't have last names and therefore aren't considered full people, and she's an orphan. She doesn't have a last name. You know, there's a level of asserting her personhood by having this sexual relationship with I mean, her boyfriend. That's what their relationship is. It's like,
Mhm.
like there's a level of like we're throwing off the ambiguity. They're a couple. There's no question here. And
It's like it's the sort of situation where you would expect a reciprocal intimate relationship.
And, like, the best freaking part about the scene where it happens is this is just so freaking cute, almost to the extent where I don't wanna spoil it, so maybe skip a couple of seconds ahead, but the scene has ended, and they're, like, under, like, the cover of bed sheets to, keep it, good for standards and practices and all.
Yeah, the classic morning after pose.
And she has a request for her boyfriend, and she, like, shamefully whispers it, that she wants to do that again. He asked her to make a request of him, and, like, there's a bit where he sorta chuckles, is like, "No, it's supposed to be something that you wanna do." And she's like, "But I do wanna do that again." Like, it's so cute because it's like
That
she's
is so precious.
she's like asserting like that she's a person and an adult and can make her own decisions, and that the things that have been said about her and other characters like her are wrong. It's a really cool moment that uses a and it honestly, it's more beautiful than sexy, but like it is like titillating in a sense. A really cool moment that actually, I was going to say I'd like to see more cases where sexuality is actually used in a positive way for the story. And that's a Tsubasa Those with Wings. There's a series that is just Tsubasa. That's why I'm saying the whole title, by the way.
Mhm.
That's different from that. But Tsubasa Those with Wings is a really good example of where like they just have a full on like it's one panel, but it's like a full page spread. They have a on panel sex scene, and it is a crowning moment for a character.
Yeah, a moment where the character healthily understands their own wants and desires and boundaries.
Hmm.
And that's important. That's something that should be represented.
It could afford to be represented more often because it's a thing that can be very difficult
Mhm.
in the real world for people who haven't really been exposed to these sorts of things.
Too often, sex in media can appear transactional, and not to spit on like sex workers in any regard, but like there is a sort of power dynamic at play in a lot of sex represented in media where it's non-consensual to one degree or another, and that is the sort of
Or
thing.
it's either non-consensual or conditional.
Or conditional, yeah, and that's unhealthy, and yet it can be represented as the norm, and that's the problem.
And I mean, not
And
for nothing, but like those sorts of things being addressed in media is an excellent place to deal with some very, very like serious subject matter like that.
I'm a
You know,
huge proponent of using fiction as a safe space to explore, like extreme emotions. Like, Matt will rag on me in some episodes of like, "Oh, Sam, you don't like feeling bad when you're reading it." I get where he's coming from. He's razzing me because he
it's
loves, but
it's not totally untrue, but
shut up.
hey, I'm there with you.
Exactly. But it's like there is a legitimate and very important place to using media as a way of exploring emotions that would otherwise be unsafe to approach in real life. And that can give you a greater understanding of yourself. One of the examples I always think about is actually from Dan Olson, Folding Ideas on YouTube. He talked about a dating sim that he played that left him,
Lady killer in a bind.
yep, left him with a legitimate sense of like betrayal for days, and it was a fictional scenario in a video game. And while that is unpleasant, it's important to think about. And the inverse is something pleasant is important to think about. Like, what do you want? And the scene that Jake cited as an example is a great example of that.
Mhm.
And sort of in a similar vein, my example for what a good example of sexy fan service is actually from the Fate series. So, one of the, like, deep lore things about Fate is that
Oh, no.
it started as a visual novel of, like, this idea of and this might be apocryphal. I don't know how true this is. I just want to get this out right now. This is just something I heard from my friend. Hi Noel, I know you listen to the show, but it's like it was this idea of, you summon these heroes from stories past and you fight for your wishes with them. And the original creator, his friend told him, basically, sex sells. Can you fuck King Arthur? Because you made Saber this sexy woman. Can you fuck her?
Hmm.
And there's these out of place, very raunchy sex scenes in mana transfer via ejaculation in the visual novel. And that's a part of the series that's kind of been hard for a lot of fans to reconcile with, all the other things talked about based on my experience in the community. But watching the Fate Stay Night anime, and particularly Fate Apocrypha, it treats the sexual intimate nature of summoners and servants in a much more gentle manner, because Shiro and Saber never have sex to transfer mana. In Fate Stay Night, it's a sort of sanitized, talked around, oh, Shiro and Rin both slept on the same cot, but they were fully clothed the whole time. But, they needed that skin contact to transfer mana. So Fate Stay Night's not a magnificent example, but Fate Apocrypha, I think, is pretty good because that has two gender nonconforming characters in Mordred and Astolfo. Mordred, son of Arthur, is physically a woman, but will only ever respond to he, him pronouns, refers to himself as a man, as a son, and will attack you if you refer to him as a woman. And then Astolfo has very feminine presenting qualities. The long braided hair, the dressing in a skirt and all that. And then suddenly there's an episode where Astolfo's getting out of the shower and, no titties and eyes of one of the characters just traced down to right about where the waist begins to form the shape of a male pelvis and then cuts away. And like, despite this, all of the characters present, like, it's a shock for the character who's first seeing Astolfo as a man. But after the initial shock, it's like Astolfo is accepted like this, Mordred is accepted as he is, and it becomes this sort of very natural acceptance of the characters of their what they assign their gender to be, despite their physical sex.
I really like that example because I think that's a shining example of the way that traditional sexy fan service can be used really well. Because I'm not sure is that when the audience learns that information about Astolfo.
Yes, that is also when the audience learns that.
That is so cool.
It's a moment of dramatic irony if you already know, but if you don't
Right.
already know.
That's actually really cool because anyone who's into the male form is going to get any audience member who's into the male form is going to get, that kind of enjoyment out of it, which is the reason it's there. But also, it's not taking you out of the story because it's giving you critical information it's giving critical information both to the characters and other characters within the story.
Mhm.
Like that's a really genius way of throwing in a little bit of raunchy fun, but still, making it enhance the story rather than detract from it.
Yeah, Fate Apocrypha, surprisingly trans in way more ways than I talked about just now. Available on Netflix, I
Neat.
think. At this point, I don't know. That's
Who
where I
knows?
watched it like 5 years ago.
Streaming services are a wasteland of sorrows, just like old TV was. The more
Didn't we
things
go to
change,
streaming services to escape old TV?
the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Ah! Anyway, let's talk about some bad examples of sexy fan service, 'cause
Ugh.
we're rife with them.
Yeah, yeah. I've got a good example. Almost every single time ever where there's any form of fan service in a fight scene.
I almost broke up with my first girlfriend because of Rosario and Vampire.
Oh man. I mean, nothing takes away from the drama and stakes of a life or death fight like jiggle physics. I'm sorry.
Mhm.
I mean, not for nothing, and this is something that the other members of the pod pushed back on at the time, but I hold by this. In a very dramatic, emotional, and climactic battle between Riza and Denji in Chainsaw Man, there was a pretty overt upskirt shot that I really didn't like.
Mhm.
And like, yes, like
I stand by that not being the worst
it's
example,
not the worst example by any
but, like,
means.
but I know what you're getting at.
It dragged me out of the scene instantaneously because there were so many different camera angles you could have gone at, and I
Mhm.
never would have noticed. But it was specifically framed in a way that you could see up her skirt.
To
And
kinda
like
flash your panties, yeah.
I mean, like, it's not egregious, but, like, it bothered me, it took me out of the moment, you know? And I mean, like, not for nothing, that's a sexy character! I'm not, like, against the idea of seeing more of her, as it were. It's just in that moment that didn't belong, and it's very, very hard in a fight scene to justify any kind of, sexualizing content, and this is another case where, boy, the ladies out there, boy, you got it so much worse than us fellas do, because
Mm.
it is almost always women. Bikini armor is thankfully kind of dying, and it should stay that way.
Oh my gosh. Being an MMO junkie in the early 2000s was a great time for my early libido, but maybe not the best for my emotional development.
I learned things about myself.
Titty armor, very nice to look at, but
It's bad for a lot of reasons.
not the healthiest thing to be a fan of.
There's actually another funny one. And I mean, like, this is a bit of a, cards on the table open thing. Where one thing, like, it was a case of sexy fan service utterly ruining a scene. And once I start talking about it, it's gonna be like you're gonna know exactly what I'm talking about instantaneously. Funny thing is, it's like I have my preferences for, fan service or indeed for more extreme stuff. And there's the thing, it's like, is what I'm into make me a bad person? And then I saw
Don't
this
talk to me about that.
well, then I saw the scene in Sword Art Online. You already know what I'm talking about. Yeah, boy, talk about, making something, like, sexy for the audience in a way that, like, is just God, how did it happen? For those of you who are blissfully unaware, in the second season of Sword Art Online, the female protagonist is literally chained to the ceiling and actually sexually assaulted on screen. Like, there's no other way of putting it. Like, that's what happens. It's not like, oh, it went up. No, it was full on sexual assault on screen, and it was framed in a way to show off the female character Asana's body. And it was so revolting, I literally could not watch the scene. I could barely listen to it. In fact, it went on for so interminably long. I actually had to skip ahead in the streaming service I was watching it on because I could not stand it. That is easily the most extreme example of sexy fan service being bad that I can think of, because I've never been more revolted by media. But it did also teach me a thing of, because I mean, I hadn't really deeply considered the places to put fan service before that point, but the degree to which it angered me at an existential level, it made me realize, boy, the framing and the intent of the actual story, because like Sword Art Online is supposed to be a drama, is what
Mhm.
it's supposed to be. So, like, if something like that happens, in a drama, you'd better goddamn well take it super freaking seriously. If it's an ecchi, on the other hand, you're kind of there for the softcore porn. And that
Again, Rosario and Vampire.
but it's like in a case like that, or even more extreme, like there's a lifting of taboo because the goal of it is different from, you know, like say just think of a random manga that isn't explicitly an ecchi,
Mhm.
and there's so much that Eden Zero gets away with. I mean, the scene I talked about is the good example of sexy fan service with Whis. That in a different series would be utterly
Horrific.
disgusting and make Rebecca an unlikable, miserable, awful character, irredeemable forever. But because Eden Zero is popcorn and candy until it's not,
We'll get to that episode eventually, Jake.
but because it doesn't take itself seriously, from a meta-contextual sense to such a degree, it it lightens the standards of what you can get away with, a character being subjected to. I mean, like, it's sort of funny because boy, howdy, does Dragon Ball skirt that line. And I do mean OG Dragon Ball. Does it skirt that line all the way till it starts getting serious with Piccolo?
Bulma, your balls.
And it's like, the only reason why I don't loathe Master Roshi is because of the time period in which he was introduced. Because, like, Roshi
It
in the
requ-
context of modern Dragon Ball should not exist. And you'll
Mhm.
note, he's a lot less pervy than he used to be, isn't he?
Uh-huh. While it's not as egregious in compared to the one that you cited, Jake, my example of bad sexy fan service hits me a lot more personally because I'm going after my child with this one. Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, the show that unironically, like, forged a big part of my life's philosophy. Like, okay, that's cringe. That's edgy. I don't give a shit. I stayed up until 3 a.m. for like most of a summer vacation watching this show in parts like 1, 2, 3, 4 on YouTube of each individual episode. Because
That was the day it was in.
that was the day it was in. I was that dragged into it. I talked about it with my friends, and they talked about the dub that they saw on the Sci Fi channel. There is one moment that just kind of takes all of the moments that you kind of have to blink past when you're watching it from a serious perspective and shoves them and like punches you in the nose with them. And that's specifically in the Logon Hen movie because like the Gurren Lagann movies, Gurren Hen and Logon Hen are, season 1 and season 2 condensed into movies with some extra scenes for, big cinematic flair, right? I don't know if you've seen them, Jake.
If I did, it was only once in eons ago.
Yeah. So the Super Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann, the big swirling spiral energy form of Kamina that's fighting the anti-spiral, that's from Lagann Hen. And that is at this like triumphant moment, it's when Lord Genome goes and he absorbs all the energy and, gives all the power to Simone and they combine all this stuff, all this like culmination of all the themes of the series. And all the characters in their like super avatar forms are buck ass naked.
Mm.
Simone's got his whole chest showing. He's got his, arms and his abs. Yoko and Nia have, their tits out, flopping on screen, nipples and everything. And I understand artistic nudity. That's not something I'm like against or prudish about. But the problem is Gurren Lagann spends an awful lot of time, especially early on, doing the sexy fan service thing. You know,
Mm.
the obvious examples being like Yoko
Yoko's
is
outfit.
Yoko's in a bikini and short shorts the entire time. We have the Kitan sisters. particularly the eldest with her massive bazongas. And even from a non feminine presenting perspective, Simone and Kamina constantly are just showing chests and abs. Like, it's a very sexual series in that regard.
It's almost as if it's like some kind of coming of age story or something.
Exactly, exactly. And but it constantly is playing at that. It's hammering at that. For God's sake, the most iconic weapon is a drill. You can't get more phallic.
Yeah.
And so you take this crowning moment of awesome, the culmination of the entire series, the moment where everything is supposed to come together and defeat the final bad guy, the ultimate refutation of the anti spiral's philosophy, this life affirming moment, and just boobs wobbling in the screen.
Yeah, and I think the problem there isn't even necessarily the characters being naked. It's the there's the jiggle physics. Like, they don't need to do that.
And this is the problem where it's like I don't want to come off as a prude. I don't want to say that like displaying the naked human body is a bad thing. But in the taken in the totality of the series, it feels out of place. If you had never seen Gurren Lagann before and you were just shown the final battle of Lagann Hen, it would feel out of place.
Yeah,
It's
I think
like this whole series is a coming of age story. It's about maturing, and we have this very immature just wobbling the lady bits on the screen, and I feel so bad saying it because I'm attacking my baby, and I'm also I also feel like a prude.
yeah, and I think you actually hit the nail on the head there because it's the degree of maturity with which the human form is being presented in that scene. There is a level of immaturity to the way the bodies are being shown. They're not adults affirming their identity as human beings. Those bodies are there to, make the below bits tingly.
Mhm.
It's
Like
it's the goal.
Nia and Yoko are like saying these really profound bits of the overarching speech. It's like, I've bet everything on the greatness of the human spirit. We humans have someone much greater than us, and for their sake we'll keep moving forward. I say these things, and it's distracting.
Yeah, it's distracting. And like again, it's like it's because it's not the human body as like it's not like the platonic ideal of the human body in the same way that like the oh god, who was the Renaissance thinker who did the form of man drawing that everyone uses.
Michelangelo.
Yeah, yeah. It's not like the Michelangelo like platonic idea of the human form, which is what that scene is doing. It's an anime sexy character, you know? It is inherently the
Leonardo
sexiness that's the problem.
da Vinci did the Vitruvian
It's
Man.
Da
I
Vinci.
was wrong.
But yeah, no, it's the I mean, again, it comes down to framing,
Mhm.
because it's like them being naked isn't even inherently the problem. It's the way in which they're naked, as it were.
And like Yoko and Nia are the most obvious examples, but like Simone is also kind of like that. Like he's this hugely muscle bound, super masculine figure. It's sexual in that regard, but also from just like a boy's perspective, it's like you see Simone like that. This is the apex of masculinity. This is Gar.
Mm.
And that can be aspirational, but it can also be distracting. It's like, do I need to be like that to be this heroic figure in my mind?
Does the aesthetic, like the degree to which the aesthetic matters to the idea?
Mhm. Gurren Lagann's really fucking good, and I love it, but it's got a lot of problems.
Yeah, look, if you can't point out the flaws in something, do you really love it?
Exactly. Before we get to the next bit, I have to use the restroom, actually. So anything else to discuss about good and bad examples of sexy fan service?
No, I think we covered it, and maybe in a fan servicey way exposed a little bit about ourselves.
Yeah. Look,
I'm sure you won't tell anyone, dear listener.
Of course not. I'm not saying I don't appreciate Spiral Energy form Simone and Yoko and Nia, but we'll stay in the negative zone for a little bit here, so we can end on a positive note. But getting into fan service, what are some bad examples that come to your mind, Jake?
I have a tendency to squint past these in most cases. There are things like the tournament of power from Dragon Ball Super, and actually a lot of even the good parts of Dragon Ball Super can have this sort of thing where it kind of feels like the series is responding to the fans. Not for nothing, but like 17 shooting the one character out of a transformation sequence and everybody yelling at him for it. That's 100% a reference to why do we let them transform, criticism that's been lobbed at Dragon Ball that, like, it's like
I
two.
feel like we should be stopping this. Nah, I want a good fight.
Yeah, and it's like, my dudes, it's 2 panels in the manga. The anime extended the transformations massively. It's the reason why it seems like they don't stop people from transforming. They're usually, diegetically in the manga, like, half a second. And that's a case where it's like we're winking and nudging to the fans and accidentally validating a bad faith criticism that Dragon Ball has been saddled with for years.
Hmm.
Anytime you have a long running series, I mean, one thing that I thought it was a clever and cute aspect, but was informed otherwise by the Bleach fans. The bit in Burn the Witch where they explicitly said it in the Bleach universe. And it's like, yeah, that's cool. And it doesn't bother me because I don't know Bleach, but apparently it has lore implications that are hard to square. It's cool that they did that, and it makes me want to read Bleach, but does it have negative consequences for the story for making that connection when it didn't have to be?
Hmm.
Because Burn the Witch very easily could have stood on its own, completely separate from Bleach.
Yeah, and that's most often the problem with this sort of like fan service. It's calling back to something in a way that makes the original thing you gotta think about it too hard. Because I won't lie, a lot of my favorite media sort of relies on hard suspension of disbelief. Why did that work? Fuck you, it's cool.
Rule of cool is a valid answer in
It's
some cases, depending on what specific story you're talking about.
it's what's kept me loving Warcraft despite everything Blizzard has done. That's my first example of bad I want to put humongous air quotes on this because I don't think it's bad. I think it is
Weak,
rely
perhaps.
weak, yes. And I'm gonna sound so sacrilegious for this, but the boo bits from Dragon Ball Z Abridged.
Mm,
And I feel so bad saying it because it's not weak. It's them calling back to their old stuff because this is the hypothetical of what the Boo series would have been. It's them doing little tidbits for Totally Not Mark.
I mean, not for nothing, but one really cool moment from that is Ultimate Gohan going up to Super Boo. Oh, what's wrong, little boy? Do you need an adult? No,
No.
I am an adult.
And that's one of the things I'm talking about because like I know that Totally Not Mark and Team Four Stars fans, the Venn diagram is mostly a circle, but it's not a perfect circle. So, like, what if you're a TNM fan who hadn't watched DBZA and saw that in the Boo review?
That's gonna mean nothing to you.
It means nothing to you.
It's a total non sequitur.
And
Um,
while it's extremely powerful for you and me as long-standing DBZA fans who saw the first I Am an Adult back on Namek fucking 10 years ago,
oh God, stop.
I won't. It's a little weak. Is and that's one of the like the trade-offs that you get doing this sort of fan service thing because it does close the loop. It does fire Chekhov's gun. But if you've been going on long enough, can you guarantee that your audience has seen everything that makes it poignant? Listen to me, Kakarot. I'm using his fucking name. If you haven't been experiencing TFS Vegeta calling Krillin the bald one for 15 years,
then that doesn't mean anything.
Mhm.
And, here's another funny thing where, and I mean, like, this actually kind of applies to Dragon Ball itself, like, proper, and, certain series which should just, stop, please. When you get fan servicey moments because, Ultimate Gohan in general, but even that really cool scene where Gohan finally inverts the "I am an adult" bit, there is something of a cheapening factor of his ascension at the end of DBZA proper.
Mhm.
Like, he's already had this moment, it makes him going Super Saiyan 2 and
You peaked.
yeah, it kinda cheapens that moment by that existing, um, I mean, I know that's one of the biggest criticisms of the Dragon Ball Super superhero movie, where it's like, it's just Super Saiyan 2 Gohan again.
With
Um,
the previous cell form, like, come on.
but, like, that's fan service, and it's like, "Okay, cool, but you did this." Um,
Mhm.
and I mean, another example, we sort of mentioned this briefly, and it's not so much of a problem in the Gundam manga we actually read, Gundam Crossbone, or at least not the first Crossbone, because there's multiple Crossbone manga series. But like, there are a number of UC Gundam manga that will like, Gundam, leave the 1 year war, please.
I'm pretty sure we have covered all 365 days of the 1 year war from both the Federation and the Zeonic perspective.
Both in space and on Earth. And it's like, you'll get these cases where, you get, like there are good examples of old mobile suits showing up again.
Mhm.
This has been adapted into manga, so it's still technically on topic. But like in Unicorn, you have a case where a Federation base is being attacked by Sleeves remnants, and they're using 1 year war mobile suits because that's what they have access to. Okay, that makes sense. They're getting trashed. And then in Double Zeta, there's also an example of 1 year war mobile suits that have been refitted, actually being able to go toe to toe with the Gundam team. But like, man, there's stuff in like between Crossbone and Victory Gundam where 1 year war mobile suits or mobile suits that look like them, like the entire Oldsmobile army. They're a Xeon remnant group that went to Mars, and they come back and like, they exist as a gigantic nostalgia trip. They make their current top of the line mobile suits look like 1 year war Xeon mobile suits, and the same with their warships. And it's
Mhm.
like, we've seen this. You're drawing on imagery for the sake of drawing on imagery. That's
And
that's where a lot of bad examples of fan service come from,
and
when the
that's where
reference doesn't mean anything.
my actually bad example comes from. Because again, the boo bits, I don't wanna call them actually bad. I wanna call
They're really
them
good and really funny.
they're really good, they're really funny, but they are very heavily reliant on you having seen the last 15 years of Team 4-star content. I'm sorry if I made you feel old, you are. But the thing that I think of as an actually bad fan service example in this regard is totally off base from a manga perspective, but the entire Warlords of Draenor expansion from World of Warcraft. I will die mad about this expansion. But
Over echo chamber indeed.
one of the worst parts, because God, I am dating myself so hard, but if you've played Warcraft 3, yes, the game that is 19 years old at this point. But if you've played Warcraft 3, then you know the moment where Gromhell's Scream kills Magtheridon, he kills the big demon, he frees his people, and in his final dying breath, he says, I have freed myself. And Thrall is like, no, brother, you freed us all. And that's big, that's impactful. You've played through 3 RTS games of the Horde fighting the influence of the demons. Warlords of Draenor starts with a pre-expansion cinematic of recreating shot for shot that fight, except Grom survives. and then makes Grom the bad guy for the entire expansion, and then expects us to suddenly accept that he has done a heel face turn in a trailer for the final raid, and then thinks that we're supposed to feel good when at the end of the final raid, after you beat the big bad guy, he goes, Draenor is free. It's like, you were on a genocide campaign 10 minutes ago. Why should we trust this?
The fact that you referenced it makes it worse.
Exactly. And that's the thing that kills me about that entire expansion, because it's nothing but calling back to the Burning Crusade expansion and old Warcraft lore, because we used time travel to make an alternate timeline, guys. It's non-canon. Don't worry about it. And that's just bad fan service on set to 11. It's using in-universe justifications to make things that, air quotes, the people liked happen again.
Mhm. Treading water.
It did inadvertently end up setting up the best expansion in the game, but that doesn't absolve it of its sins.
Yeah, as its own standalone thing.
It doesn't help that they basically forgot about everything except Gul'dan. Like, oh hey, we created an alternative timeline, so we have Gul'dan alive again. Cool, we'll just make him the big bad guy. But what about everybody else on alternative Draenor? What about him?
Yeah, a lot of times when this sort of fan service stumbles, it comes from a place of this is what's going to sell because it's a recognizable thing. Sequelitis does
Mm,
this.
uh-huh.
I mean, in a big way. I think because it's like Boruto's dad was a popular manga back in the way before
Back in the long
times.
back in the long ago when you and I were doing hand signs on the middle school playground.
Oh god. I know to some extent Boruto has actually been able to make it work because I mean it's lasted quite a long time and it's still I believe it's still going strong. But
S
like
From what I've seen, strong might be a stretch, but it is still going.
it is still going, but it's like there's a level of you can kind of feel that this is capitalizing on a popular thing
Mhm,
as opposed to it understands what works about it. It's using a name without understanding what makes it worth caring about.
mhm,
I mean, anything that gets referenced as a like for the fans kind of reference is something that has to be special to people and a large number of people too.
yeah.
So,
Again, to date the episode, Risk of Rain Returns, Coalescence off the soundtrack of that. That is potent and powerful to the fans of the franchise. I know I'm leaving you in the dust on that one, Jake, but
like it's a good way of testing the degree to which the creators are invested in a thing.
Mhm,
Bad fan service is a really telltale sign that the people working on this are doing it for a paycheck because they know that the fans are going to eat it up. A lot of bad anime movies that have been on No Read November fall into this category. Full Metal
oh,
Alchemist.
oh god, don't even talk to me about that.
Man, can you believe?
No, I can't believe literally any of it.
But yeah, whereas if you get a really good fan reference, that is an that is a near guarantee that the people working on the project love the thing as much as you do.
Ironically enough, my good example is actually well, one of the two is from World of Warcraft Legion, the expansion immediately following Warlords of Draenor, because Illidan's entire storyline really feels like it's written by somebody who deeply cares for the character and wants to call back to the important moments for him. Because not only do they successfully resolve a lot of the lingering plot points from the last time he showed up in the canon, but they do it in ways that make the character feel cool, not like a Gary Stew, mostly. I have as much as I love the rejection of the gift cutscene, I have a few issues with him just lasering Jesus to death.
Well, you know.
After you beat Kill Jaden, and he opens up the portal to Argus, and he goes, "Sometimes the hand of fate must be forced." I'm like, I remember that cutscene from Warcraft 3. And it's a series of just playing Illidan's best hits over and over and over again, but in a way that it feels like it's advancing not only his story, but the story of the world. And I think that's the best way that you can do a fan service moment in this regard, where you not only call back to the moment where the character was at their A game, but you then take them to their S game.
Mm. Oh, I got an amazing example that is exactly in that vein.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna confuse everybody now when I say Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2.
Okay, now I'm confused.
So, there is a scene in Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2. It's a sequence in the like Future Trunks timeline whilst Future Gohan is still alive.
The worst timeline, objectively.
This was before the Goku Black arc happened, okay?
Still the worst. I do not stand
Eh,
corrected.
yeah, you're not wrong. Because of shenanigans in the game story that are convoluted and not important, Trunks and the player avatar character are speaking to future Gohan after, the gameplay shenanigans have happened. And Trunks, in a moment of weakness, says that because this is the battle that is supposed to, like, Gohan is supposed to go off and fight number 17 and number 18 and die. And Trunks says, "This time I can change it. I'll go with you." And a line that's just genuinely heartbreaking. And boy, does Eric Vale pull it off. "This time I won't hold you back." It is such an emotional scene. And then the Supreme Kai of Time, like, immediately cuts in and speaks to your character and says, "You can't do that. You have to stop him. If Trunks, if you do that, you'll change history." And then referring to your character, "You have to stop him," which
Mhm.
is, shout out to the animators who did the physical animating on the silent protagonist and their understandably concerned reaction to this, right?
Man, all roads lead back to Azeroth because the Caverns of Time dungeons are built around the idea of making sure that key moments in history happen the way they're supposed to, even when they're the most tragic shit that's ever occurred.
This scene in Xenoverse 2 actually gets even better.
Hmm.
So like this is future Gohan, and like he's overhearing most of this, right?
Hmm.
And it's pretty overt that he knows what's going on. He clues into what's going on. And he turns to Trunks and he says, "If you're here, it means that Bulma was able to complete her time machine. That must mean the future is safe, right?"
Ooh.
Man, that is such a freaking cool moment. That version of Gohan was never going to win, there too much had happened. He lost too much. He was too far behind.
This is not where my story ends. This is where Gohan's story ends.
But
But
funny as
like,
that joke is, it's also true. It's not where his story ends because Trunks is who he is because of, this alternate timeline version of Gohan, and his future, assuming you ignore Super's existence, is safe because that Trunks did become strong enough to protect that version of Earth.
we don't talk about Super's version of Future
We
Trunks'
don't
timeline.
talk about Super generally, like, just at
Mhm.
all. And then the scene ends with future Gohan motioning to the player character and says, he says, "The future is safe, isn't it? That means that this battle has a real purpose, and it looks like you've made a good friend. You can't leave a good friend behind, can you?" And like, man, it's just such a good scene. It makes me think about the original context of it, because it's like
See, and And that is the hallmark of a good use of one of these scenes.
Hmm.
It makes you think about the thing you're nostalgic about in a new lens. It doesn't just go, "Hey, remember this." It goes, "Hey, remember this, and now think about it this way."
Yeah, it's one of those ones where it's like thinking about like future Gohan, it's like, what would the timeline have been like had future Gohan lived? You know, it's like, would he have gone back in time? You know, like how would things have changed? The good examples that we have are a lot of like, timeline shenanigans, but like makes you think about what ifs, makes you think about the story in a new context. And only like that version of Gohan is different from the version of Gohan that, we're familiar with, and it makes you understand the character a little bit more complexly. You know, it
Mhm,
it references the original scene, but it adds to its own scene, and on its own is a good scene, you know? And like this can even be the case for smaller references. Going back to a manga that we've actually read, a cool bit of it's sort of like, mech nerd fan service of the enemies that the Crossbone Vanguard are fighting. The mobile suits they're using, they don't look quite like the Zanskar Empire's mobile suits, but
mhm.
they're close. You start to see certain aspects of Zanskar mobile suits, like the way that the camera sensors are on these sort of like bulbous insect eye looking things. Whereas the rest of the, most of the mobile suit looks like a then modern mobile suit. It's a clever little bit of retroactive. I don't know if this is the right way of putting it, but like retroactive foreshadowing of like here's the connective tissue. Where did this design come from? It came from this other group.
Speaking of narrative elements that are, very hit or miss, doing something that hadn't been mentioned before, but it's actually foreshadowing to a previous thing. That is a coin flip between, "Oh, you're a genius," and, "Oh, you're a hack."
Yeah. Again, it's one of those ones where it's like the two pieces are, you need the love and passion of the people making that scene,
Mhm,
whether it be writing or whether it be art or whether it be animation, whatever media it may be. You need the love and the passion of a fan to think of something small, whether it be calling back to a grand moment or just a fun little quirky bit. And then you also need the skill and craft of making the scene work in the context of, does it work as its own, or does it work as its own scene or reference? Does it like call back to something meaningful, and does the callback like enhance the thing being called back to?
for a bit of a blurst example, like I said, and because I can't stand their alma manga to save my life despite this podcast, I mentioned I just had, finished Baldur's Gate 3. Um, I know that and for my, history with that franchise, I played 45 minutes of Baldur's Gate 1 before the 3.5 mechanics made me wanna tear my hair out, and I have very long hair, that would've been very painful. But, I do know that one of the characters that shows up as a villain in BG3 is a playable, recruitable companion character in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. And from what I've seen from fan perspectives, her, engoodening romance arc is one of the most intricate and well-written parts of the entire canon. However, that's very difficult to accomplish in game, and it had already been canonized by Wizards of the Coast that she had her bad end in Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, therefore making her a villain for 3. And I know there's a lot of fans of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 that are mad about this. And that becomes that moment of, sort of blurst fan service. It's like, "Oh, we're calling back to Viconia Devere. She's evil." But like in my Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 gameplays, I did everything right to make her good. Why is this happening?
Oh yeah, video games that the ending of the previous game being multiple choice,
Mhm.
uh, you know,
And
I mean, I know, like
even
Dark Souls 3 referencing Dark Souls 2, because it's like it's set in the same location as Dark Souls 1, but it also references Dark Souls 2. So is Drang Lake the same place or is it a different place? Does it still exist or does it not?
and even
That's a
for
good example.
yeah, and even for BG3, like it's basically a direct sequel to the Descent into Avernus module for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, which is a multiple choice ending. But Baldur's Gate 3 basically says, whatever ending you chose for Descent into Avernus, it's one of the ones where Zariel stays an Archdevil.
Fallout series, there are a lot of bad endings, and almost always the bad ending is not the canon one. It can't be because that irrevocably changes the world. So it's like if you want to reference what came before, you have to soft canonize an ending. Elder Scrolls is in the same place.
Yeah, which is hilarious for Elder Scrolls because ES2 had so many endings that they soft canonized all of them
Isn't it like the Tears of a Dragon now or something?
because no matter what, ending ES2 involves activating the Numidium. It causes a dragon break, which is basically you turn on a mecha so powerful it breaks the linear flow of time. So every ending happened at once,
Even the mutually exclusive ones.
even the mutually exclusive ones. And like that's something that Elder Scrolls can do because it's inherently a wonky Hyperborean bullshit rules universe. It's a little bit harder with things like Fallout or Baldur's Gate or Gundam,
High Gundam Thunderbolt.
where you're dealing with very concrete timelines.
High Mobile Suit Gundam: The Origin, which we may do at some point.
I really like the animation. I really like Char, but I understand the problems.
Oh god, the gun tanks existing before the Zaku is an interesting choice.
It's hilarious that we decided to end this on good examples and we got back to bad ones. Anyway, thank you everybody once again for tuning into the Over Manga Cast.
Oh,
As always, you can find us on all of your social medias, or we are at Over Manga Cast, Facebook, Twitter, X,
whatever it's
Instagram,
called right now.
Spotify, the places.
One place that is at least seems constant, sort of, is YouTube, where you can like, comment, and subscribe. You can comment on our episodes there. The episodes go up on a 2-week delay. So you can head over to overmangacast.com, where there's also a comment feature. Give us some examples of series that have both good and bad fan service, so that we could praise or rage at them, whichever gets more click through.
Indeed. And make sure to tune in next Thursday where we are going to be diving deep into another manga or comic book or something. And we'll see you then. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Okay, so if I can rant about the Warcraft timeline for another 20 minutes,
Only 20.
I can go longer if you want.